Now everybody hopes that Iraq can enter a new era of prosperity and peace. And I guess that this will become a reality if the Arab states and the international organizations will help you to build a new, prosperous, and stable Iraq. So I'd like to ask you whether this scenario is realistic and what the international community can do to help you attain those objectives.
You want me to answer here or to?
As you like.
It would be nice to be free and not to read the statements.
Unconventional.
No, but this is really it's a very difficult question for us to manage, because the new government, really, if we look at the government of Dr. Adel Abdel Mahdi, has a very strong program. This program is to provide services as well as to strengthen the intelligence as well as the military. And I think this is important for Iraq, to have a strong military, internal military. Iraq has 6 countries border its nation, and these countries have different outlook on Iraq itself. So for us to be weak, it's not very good. It's not a good idea. A strong Iraq today is really a stabilizer in the area. And this is the message the President and the Prime Minister is actually spreading when we went and visited Jordan, visited Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Iran. And what we said is that the stability of Iraq is very crucial. Iraq is a core Arab country in the east side. However, we continue to have a good relationship with Iran as well as with Turkey. Now, we like to have a cooperation and collaboration with countries. We thank, as the minister rightly so, she thanked the coalition that actually helped Iraq in defeating Daesh. And I stop in the word defeat. We have defeated Daesh militarily, but not yet, not completed. And this is really crucial for us. And we realize that. On our border in Syria sits about 2,000 fighters, the east of Euphrates. So we need to make sure that those fighters, they don't cross over to our border. This is actually putting us always in an alarming situation to make sure that we could combat them very quickly. Today, the Iraqi forces are actually combating the terrorism and Daesh on the offensive side, not the defense. We used to be defensive all the time. Today, we are making operations that are offensive operations. We are looking at their cells very quickly and attacking their cells. We have a very strong intelligence and collaboration with Jordan, with Syria, and also with Russia and the United States in terms of combating Daesh. There are a lot of issues that we need to take care of going forward. One of them is the cost of war toward Iraq. The clearing of Daesh from Mosul, Salahuddin, and Anbar cost us practically $120 billion. And that is a staggering number if you look at it, because now that will put more pressure on our budget, as we are paying practically close to $10 billion in interest alone every year with our budget. And this is really very important. On the other hand, we need to modernize our military equipment, make sure that our equipment are up to date and our training are up to date. That's why we are reaching out to NATO. We are reaching out also to our friends in the United States and Italy. Thank you to the minister and her team are working with us. Also, we are training our police, the local police, because I think some of these issues are localized. We can't really. Iraq is a very large country, medium-sized, not large, medium-sized country. But you can't have army everywhere, but we have to have a local police that are well-trained. Now Jordan is doing really tremendous job in training our local police in combating these things and then also identifying these issues. So, have we defeated Daesh? Yes, we cleared them out of Mosul, cleared them out Salahuddin, Diyala, and Anbar. And that caused us tremendous damage in terms of infrastructure, and we need to rebuild. The Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi is focusing on rebuilding, and actually we are looking at our friends to help in rebuilding Iraq, and I think Kuwait has done a fantastic job in its conference in Kuwait that happened in February. And that conference has actually gathered about 70 countries to come and assist Iraq in its situation. This is all good, and what we are looking forward to working with our friends and make sure that Syria is also going in the right directions. Because if Syria takes steps back, we will be affected. And this is the issue that we are really looking at.
Thank you so much, Minister Al-Hakim. Mr. Al-Hakim said that Iraq needs help, needs to be stronger than it has been so far. And of course, the role of international organizations and the multilateral collaboration like NATO and UN can provide will be crucial also in the near future. And I guess that your opinion about this topic is very important, Secretary General Stoltenberg. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. One of NATO's main tasks is to help to fight terrorism and to stabilize our neighbors, because when our neighbors are more stable, we are more secure. And therefore NATO and NATO allies have participated and contributed to the fight against Daesh, ISIL, in Iraq and Syria ever since the beginning. The global coalition to defeat ISIS was actually established on the margins of the NATO summit in Wales in 2014. And all NATO allies have been part of that coalition all the time. And NATO has also provided direct support with our AWACS surveillance planes, and NATO allies as the United States, Italy, United Kingdom, France, many others have participated in different ways in the fight against Daesh. And I would like to commend Iraq for the bravery and the professionalism of their soldiers, because actually they have been on the front line, able to defeat Daesh in Mosul and many other places. This is important for Iraq, but it's also important for all of us, because if Daesh had been successful in establishing the caliphate they tried to establish in Iraq and Syria, that wouldn't only have been a problem for the close to 8 million people living in Daesh-controlled territory, but it would have been a problem for all of us, because that would have been a platform for organizing, planning, financing, and executing terrorist attacks against NATO allied countries. So we are in Iraq to help Iraq, but we're also in Iraq to help ourselves. And therefore we will continue to stay in Iraq with a new training mission. We are scaling up our training activities in Iraq. It's a Canadian commander which will now command this training mission. And the idea is to train the trainers to help Iraq modernize and strengthen the capabilities of the Iraqi armed forces to make sure that Daesh doesn't come back. And I think that NATO has to be able to move in and to conduct big combat operations, as NATO and NATO allies have done in Afghanistan, as we have done in Iraq, over Libya and many other places. But I think that the lesson learned, or in the Balkans, but I think the lesson learned from Afghanistan and from the Balkans and from Iraq is that in the long run, prevention is better than intervention. And for NATO, it is better to train local forces, enabling them to stabilize their own country without NATO being forced to come in with a big number of combat troops in combat operations. So NATO is ready, but NATO would like to avoid being forced back into big combat operations. And the best way of doing that is to enable Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and these countries to stabilize their own countries. And that's the reason why NATO now is focusing more and more on training, capacity building, enabling local forces to fight terrorism themselves. We strongly believe that that's the best weapon in the fight against terrorism.
So it's really important. Prevention instead of intervention is a key concept, and I guess this offers me the opportunity to ask our Minister Trenta, what is now the Italian strategy? Because we know that we have roughly 1,500 soldiers deployed in Iraq and another 900 in Afghanistan. And so how will we calibrate from now and going forward our presence and with what kind of objectives we expect to attend?
I don't know if it's working. Okay. We decided to reduce just a little our presence in Afghanistan, but we decided also to maintain the responsibility for the stability of Afghanistan. So we will stay there, taking care of the most important function that we are doing, that is training and advising, and this is exactly what you told now. This is the most important thing for stabilization. And we will open to other countries that want to work with us under our control in our area. And this is just what we will do in Afghanistan starting from this year. We will reduce totally 200 men and women. While for Iraq, we decided to withdraw from Mosul, because in Mosul, the necessity in this moment is not so high as it was in the past, because luckily we have done, and the coalition has done a very good job with Iraqi soldiers that are really able to take care of this area in this moment. But we will stay in Iraq because we have a long standing relations with the country. And we will stay with NATO, and we will stay there with our mission, continuing the activity of training. And we have a mission in Niger, as you know. For now, it's a mission in which we have some mobile training team. It's not a big mission. The aim of the mission is to strengthen the capacity of the local military to face the problem of migrations, illegal migration. So also there we are doing training. And we are in Libya. You know, stabilization in Libya is important for Italy, but is important also for Europe, is important for everyone. It is linked to the problem of migration, but not only to migration, because there is criminality, there is every kind of criminality. So our presence in Libya is always a presence to train people. And also we have a hospital there, because we think that is always, and this is a hospital that is open to the people, to the normal people, to the civil society. I think this is a good tool to arrive to the people and to stabilize the country.
Thank you so much. And I would like to ask Minister Al-Hakim, you mentioned Syria at the end of your first introductory speech. What kind of relations could you imagine in the near future with Syria? What can be the future of Syria, as it's still a very destabilized country and with a regime which is still the target of sanctions, and therefore I guess it would be very important to see what is the view of the Syrian situation and what you would wish for the region.
Well, we always maintained an excellent relationship with the Syria. We have never really, separated our relationship from them. We continued to work with them, to work with the government of Syria. We are at contact with them. We have our ambassador in Damascus. So from that point, we established a very strong relationship with them. That's one thing. In terms of where the Syrian situation is going, there were a lot of international conferences. The UN has recently issued what is called the Principle and Parameters paper, how to deal with the Syrian government. And they said, well, there is no red line in this piece of paper that produced by the DPA and the United Nations. It says there is no red line to deal with the Syrian government. Therefore, today, if you want to move humanitarian assistance from one point to another point, you need the Syrian government. This is reality. Okay, you need the permission from the Syrian government. To us in Iraq, the best scenario is to have Syrian united. There is no small enclave here. Remove practically all of the external military presence in Syria will be removed completely. And then have the Syrian, strong army to come and make sure that they have the territory under control. Today, you got the Turks, you got the American, you got the Russian, you got Iranian, you got non-state actors in there. You can't have a united Syrian with a government that we think it should be led by Syrian and it should be more democratic when you get a lot of forces already sitting on the territory. So let's do one thing first. Let's make sure that after we established at least a peace process and then have a new constitution written and then new system in the Syria, which we believe it is essential, then you got the issue of Idlib. And Idlib, it's now an international issue. It's not only a Syrian issue. Today, in Idlib alone, there are 30,000 active terrorist fighters there from different countries, multiple countries. Tunisia, Saudi Arabia, Iraqis, you name them, they are all there from Asia, from Europe. There are, from France, from England, from everywhere. Okay? Now, what are you going to do with these 30,000 fighters in Idlib? How are we, as an international community, try to deal with this and help the Syrian actually work this process? So this is an issue that we have not resolved. The UN already had a plan, and I think the plan is very good, a humanitarian plan, assistance. They have a principle and parameters paper, and I encourage everybody to read that one because I think this is what it says. There is also an embargo by the European. It says if there is no political process, we are not going to jump in and help the reconstruction of Syria. So it is a very complicated, really, a set of issues that had to be put together and then help the Syrian government move forward. When I was at ESCWA, we estimated about Syria will need $350 to $400 billion of, solid money to reconstruct and bring the people back to normal. There are a lot of IDPs inside Syria. There is also a lot of refugees from outside. So this is really an international issue rather than a Syrian issue alone. We, as neighbor of Syria, we feel that. We feel that the Syrian need and requires a lot of help, but we feel also that the European and the EU have a stand that says political process first, then the help on the reconstruction second. I would say today, cancel that all. Let's work on Idlib. Let's make sure that Idlib is clear. What are we going to do with these fighters? How are we going to deal with them? Then later on we'll come in and figure out how do we deal with the process politically as well as economically in Syria.
Thank you very much. This is a very important topic. I mean, 30,000 extremists ready to do anything because they have nothing to lose. If you want to prevent new problems, you should, we as the international community, should tackle this problem serious. So I ask you, Secretary General Stoltenberg, what can be done to stop and defeat the remaining fighters of the Islamic State, and what can be done to prevent that their ideology can become a sort of new attraction for other thousands of young people around the Middle East, and not only Middle East, as we know?
I think you're very right saying that ISIS is not defeated. ISIS is degraded, and they have lost control over almost all the territory they controlled in Iraq and Syria. But ISIS is still there, partly underground, and partly they still control some territory, especially in Syria. So we should not underestimate that organization, even though they were not able to establish the territorial caliphate they aimed at just a few years ago. Second, we see ISIS not only in Iraq and Syria, but we see it in other countries, in Africa, in Asia, and in Afghanistan. ISIS Khorasan is back, trying to get a foothold in Afghanistan, and one of the challenges we are faced with in Afghanistan is actually ISIS and also Al-Qaeda. So one of the reasons I strongly believe that we need to continue to be in Afghanistan is to prevent Taliban from coming back and then allowing extremist groups to control parts of Afghanistan again, and ISIS to establish the caliphate in Afghanistan they were not able to establish in Iraq and Syria. To fight extremism and terrorism, we need many different tools. We need political efforts, diplomatic efforts, economic efforts. We need to stand up in the ideological fight against these extremist values. So we need everything from teachers to religious leaders to social workers to address many of the neighborhoods in our own countries where actually many of these people are recruited from. So this is a really comprehensive effort where we need a lot of different tools. Speaking on behalf of NATO, of course, my main responsibility is the military tools we are responsible for. And we also need military tools to defeat them, as we have done in Iraq and Syria, and as we are doing and addressing in countries like Afghanistan. We need intelligence to make sure that when foreign fighters try to return back home, we're able to track them and to hold them accountable and make sure that they're not able to develop or to establish cells and networks within our own country. So this is military intelligence, civilian intelligence, border control, again, a wide range of different tools. Let me highlight one aspect related to the fight against terrorism, which is sometimes underestimated, and that is cyber. They are operating in cyberspace. They recruit. They convey their messages. They use it for propaganda purposes, and they also conduct a lot of their financial transactions in cyberspace. So cyber is now important for NATO and NATO allies for many reasons, not least in the fight against terrorism. Also, what we call sovereign cyber capabilities or offensive cyber has been extremely important in defeating ISIS. Their cyber or their cyber networks, their home pages has been also penetrated by NATO allies, and that has been extremely important to reduce the infrastructure, to degrade the infrastructure of ISIS. The last thing I will say is that we need political efforts. NATO is both a military and a political alliance. And therefore I would also like to commend Italy for its important role, not only in Afghanistan, in Iraq, but also in addressing the challenges we see in Libya, including hosting the conference a few days ago in Palermo. That was an important initiative. I'd like to congratulate Italy on that, because we need these kind of political initiatives to make progress in the work towards a negotiated peaceful solution to the crisis in Libya. So representing NATO, I strongly believe also in non-military means of effort to solve the conflicts we see many places in the world, including Libya. So many thanks to Italy for its initiative on Libya. Thank you.
I will remain with you because you mentioned Afghanistan and you mentioned Syria. Well, Afghanistan is a long-term problem as it started in 2001, and apparently the situation is not yet solved. And what are the differences between the situations in Syria and Afghanistan, and do we have the risk we face the risk that Syria becomes a new Afghanistan, I mean, a long-term problem instead of a new short-term opportunity for peace.
There are many differences between Afghanistan and Syria, and I agree that there are big problems in Afghanistan still after 17 years of the NATO presence there. Having said that, I would just like to highlight that the main reason why we are in Afghanistan is to prevent Afghanistan becoming once again a safe haven for international terrorists. And we have achieved that. There is violence, there are problems, there are setbacks. ISIS or Taliban, Al-Qaeda is still there. But at least it's not the safe haven it was before 2001 to organize planned terrorist attacks against our own countries. Second, the other thing we have achieved is that we have been able to transfer the responsibility for the security in Afghanistan to the Afghans. We have to remember that not many years ago, NATO was responsible for a combat operation in Afghanistan with more than 100,000 troops. Now the Afghans are doing themselves what we used to do with more than 100,000 troops. It's not easy. There are a lot of problems, but at least on the front line we find Afghan soldiers, Afghan police, Afghan security forces supported by us. We train them, we fund them, we equip them, we advise them. Italian soldiers in Iraq, NATO soldiers other places. But it's the Afghans that are repelling or responding when Taliban and others are attacking. And we are gone from more than 100,000, actually 140,000 peak, to now 16,000 NATO soldiers. So, again, I admit it's not easy, but the alternative, and there's a cost of staying in Afghanistan, political cost, economic cost, human cost. But if we leave, Taliban will come back. And the cost of leaving is higher than the cost of staying in Afghanistan, and that's the reason why we stay and try to create the conditions for a political solution, because Taliban has to understand that they will never win on the battlefield. They have to sit down and negotiate a political settlement. Syria, it's very different. We need also there to support efforts to find a political solution. We need to continue to address the existence of ISIS, Daesh, especially in northern Syria. NATO allies are... NATO is not present in northern Syria as an organization. We provide some direct support to the coalition, but NATO allies are and are still fighting Daesh, ISIL in northern Syria. And for me, it is also extremely important that we try to coordinate the efforts of different NATO allies, especially Turkey, the United States, United Kingdom, and all other allies. And I welcome the fact that, for instance, the United States and Turkey have now agreed on joint patrolling around the city of Manbij, which is the way we need to work to address the instability in northern Syria.
Thank you so much. Minister Trenta, following those remarks, we know that Italy, Secretary Stoltenberg mentioned the agreement about Libya, which is very important. And does it mean that Italy will change his priorities in foreign and defense policy, as we are in many countries like Afghanistan, Libya, Lebanon, Iraq, etc.? What will be our priorities in the near future?
I think that is not possible to say which are our priorities, what will be our priorities in the future, because we don't know what will be the future. The priorities are to support the strategic interest of Italy, to support the international peace and stabilization, and we will see what we can do. In the moment we have to do something, comparing the situation also with our conditions in the country. So there will be some moment in which we are not ready to make 100% of what we have done in the past. This does not mean that we are changing our idea. All the decisions that we take are not the decision forever. So I don't want to say that we don't go out from Afghanistan, I already ensured, but just that in this moment we need to take care of Libya more than Afghanistan. But we will take the responsibility of Afghanistan also. So we think that it is very important always to evaluate the interest of international community, that is our interest, because we are in the international community. Our alliances, so which are the strategies of our alliances, and which are the interests of Italy and of the people of Italy. We put all together, and from this we can decide our policy.
Thank you so much. And I will go back to Iraq. Iraq is a fascinating but complex country where the relations between Shiite, Sunni, and Kurds constituencies are key to govern, to take control of the country in a right and positive way. How will your new government manage this historical and very critical problem?
This is a very good question, because if you look at the Prime Minister today, Dr. Adel Abdul Mahdi doesn't have even one member of parliament, from his group. He came in from completely outside the political parties. We have in parliament 329 members. 329. Adel Abdul Mahdi today has none, 0. 5 ministers came out that he has selected, has 0 members to support those. So if you look at, this is really a new turn in Iraqi politics. If you look at from 2003 to the last election, it's clearly that the people have lost interest in going to the voting and votes. The last election actually produces a very low number of people going to vote for the government. That tells the government that the process and the system in the past is not working. So let's change that. And it also tells that the groups, the political groups, that what you guys are doing is also not working. Definitely very high corruption, as well as governments are not very effective. It is a shame that a country like Iraq, with 100 years old, at least from the new Iraq, from 1920, 1921, till now cannot provide clean water and electricity with all of the resources we have. It is just a shame of that. So therefore, I think the people of Iraq has told, their member of parliament, look, we are going to send you to parliament, but provided you bring people other than the traditional people that you bring all the time. And this is what happened. So when they agreed that Dr. Adel Abdul Mahdi will come in with absolutely no backing in parliament, he brings his ministers, his government, to lead, and he puts a program. I think, as a minister, it's really extremely aggressive. With that program, he puts 3 phases. A first phase of 100 days to execute, then the middle, which is about a year, 12 months, and then 40 months. If we survived, there's a big if. This is really huge in Iraqi politics. There is also a possibility that this government cannot survive. But we need to go back to parliament and say, we have to execute based on the budget is being provided, and the budget is sometimes fluctuating, because if you look at Iraq really is a single product country. It depends about 90 to 92% on oil, and oil is a commodity. It's based on market, supply and demand. So therefore, you can't really budget on a price of oil that is actually going up and down. So therefore, your resources are very limited, your taxation are very weak, your other measures of income or means of incomes are very limited. So Dr. Adel Abdul Mahdi and his government really have a very sort of long way to go. And when we sit in the Council of Ministers to discuss the program, we are very realistic of what we could do and we cannot do. The Iraqi government, unfortunately, become the only sole of employer in Iraq. The private sector has not yet been developed. And if you don't develop a private sector, you cannot observe the type of people that are coming in. You've heard the president say today we are 38 million. We increased 1 million a year. That means we need a lot of schools, we need a lot of health, and we need also a tremendous number of employment. We have about 18 to 25% of unemployment of young people and college graduate. We graduate about 125,000 every year, our universities. Where do we get these jobs from? How do we provide jobs for those people? This is the challenges that faces the Prime Minister and faces this coalition of Kurds, Shia, and Sunnis going in together in this government. So, in best description, it's a fragile. It requires a lot of assistance. That's why we toured with the President to Iran, to Kuwait, to Saudi Arabia, to United Arab Emirates, to Jordan, and asked them that Iraq cannot go and become another area of conflict. We need peace in Iraq. We need stability in Iraq so we could actually have an economic development and program.
Fair enough, I guess. But we'll remain in the region to see what's happening in one of your neighbor countries is Iran. We know that the Trump administration, who played a major role in defeating military the caliphate in Syria, now has taken a different approach toward Iran, and they have decided, the U.S. has decided new sanctions against Tehran. What can be the consequences for the region, for your country, and what is the position of your government?
Well, if you look at the actual, it's not an embargo because it's only an embargo on countries that imported oil from Iran, and we are not an importer of oil from Iran at all. However, we do have a relationship with Iran. Last year, for instance, we issued 6 million visas for religious tourists to Iraq. So we do have a lot of tourists coming back and forth. We have a lot of trade. We are about $12 billion a year of trade with Iran. We import some gas. We import electricity from them. Our position, and we told the American clearly, that we are in a situation where, first of all, we cannot stop trading with a country like Iran because it's our neighbor. We have 1,400 miles or kilometer of borders, historical, geographic relationship with them. So for us, we are not importer of oil. Therefore, we don't really have an issue with what the U.S. is actually imposing on Iran for this.
If I'm not wrong, I guess a plane is waiting for you, General Secretary Stoltenberg, so I fear you have to leave this day. So I want to thank you very much. It was really a pleasure and an honor to have you here on stage.